presentation. We'd like to now call on Professor J. Batongbacal.
Thank you, sir. Honored guests and attendees here at the forum, good afternoon and welcome to the Philippines, since it's the first time you're having this forum here. As expected, being the last speaker on the same topic, I find myself with very little to say, given that several have already given detailed accounts of various aspects of the current state of play in the West Philippine Sea. Nonetheless, what I would like to do is basically to leave you with more or less three broad images with key points to remember, which essentially summarize everything that you've heard in the past hour or so. And I hope that this memory aid, shall we say, these takeaways can be helpful in, number one, allowing you and your respective constituencies when you go back home to understand the Philippines' current situation and the real score, shall we say, of what's happening here in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, particularly with respect to the Philippines-China disputes. Number two, from that understanding, we hope that you can then also see things from our perspective and understand the reasons for why we are doing these things, which for some might be either puzzling, given that we are a less powerful country that's facing up to the most powerful country in this region, and for others seem to cast us in the role of puppets or troublemakers, which is what some unfortunately tend to start off with in viewing the Philippines' actions and what it is doing here in the West Philippines and South China Sea. But third, most important, I hope that with this broad understanding and all the information that you've now been absorbing the past hour or so, you would be able to then see that joining together, cooperating and helping each other in facing up to the situation is really something that we all have to do, especially when we see that the world is turning a little bit more, say, unpredictable and uncomfortable than what we would like. No? So hopefully this will give you some food for thought. First slide, please. First of all, what is happening right now can be best illustrated by what you see on the screen. These are three maps of the activities of Chinese vessels, both government and militia vessels, in the South China Sea. And what you see is since 2020, proceeding from left to right, we've seen a visible increase in the patrol tracks and the presence of these various vessels, both government, i.e. China Coast Guard, and militia vessels, which are supposedly private fishing vessels but are actually acting in coordination with the China Coast Guard. And not seen here, of course, are the PLA Navy vessels that are also there. And what is happening essentially from all the activities that have been presented before you is that China is engaging in what I'm referring to as persistent presence and maritime exclusion operations. Yes, Admiral Ong, I'm still trying to avoid the word blockade so as to not confuse it with the term blockade, which is an act of war under the laws of armed conflict. But persistent presence and maritime exclusion is a term I'm using to more clearly describe what they're doing in a peacetime, in a technically peacetime situation. And that is by saturating essentially the South China Sea with their government and private and paramilitary assets. They are essentially now excluding the littoral countries from the South China Sea. On the part of the Philippines particularly, our fishermen have been, especially in the last few years, have been telling of how just seeing Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese militia vessels on the horizon already fills them with a sense of dread and fear, because they've seen some instances where Filipino fishing vessels were rammed by these Chinese vessels. They've been subjected on numerous occasions to intimidation by Chinese Coast Guard vessels, not only in their large boats, but also in small rubber boats circling around them menacingly. They've seen firsthand also the incidents between Philippine government vessels and Chinese vessels in some of the incidents that you've seen earlier. No? And what they're doing now is that this saturation is basically concentrated around the low-lying areas in the South China Sea, sheltering reefs and low tide elevations. And they are trying to establish continuous presence, no, through these various assets, especially the maritime militia, which are fishing vessels, but they don't do much fishing. They're there basically to just establish continuous presence on the fishing grounds, no, which intimidates and scares away our fishermen. These are in addition to the artificial islands that they've now established fully as forward operating bases for their Coast Guard, their Navy, as well as their militia. Since the establishment of those artificial islands in the southern part of the South China Sea, i.e. on the seven reefs that they occupied, they've been able to create this presence, which is now continuous all across the South China Sea. Okay? And by using these as forward operating bases, they're now engaged in actively excluding and interfering with all activities, whether private or government, no, of the Philippines. And we expect that they also are doing the same with against other countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. The current focal points on our side of the South China Sea, which we call the West Philippine Sea, are the reefs mentioned earlier, Bajo de Masinloc or Scarborough Shoal, Escoda Shoal, and Rosul Reef, as well as what we call Ayungin Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal in the international charts. Okay? Could you click the slide one more time? So this is as of 2024, and you see again the increase in the number and intensity. And this is just the moving tracks, no? If you were to look at other data, you would also see pinpoints of the presence, indicating the presence of these vessels all across the South China Sea. And especially in the last year, this persistent presence and interference operations, these exclusion operations, have begun to move above the sea. In the past year, the Philippine Air Force has reported a marked increase in sightings and detections of aircraft, mostly drone aircraft, but sometimes also combat aircraft. And that's why there were, I think you also saw some incidents, some pictures of an incident involving Chinese combat aircraft interfering with or trying to intimidate Philippine aerial patrols just on our side of the South China Sea. And certainly these exclusion zones are being enforced by them around the 7 artificial islands. Okay? And so they're basically expanding this exclusion slowly, incrementally over the years. For now, many of our fishermen, who after all venture into these areas in small traditional boats, averaging around 20 tons, no? Biggest probably is around 70 tons, but they're all wooden traditional boats. They are intimidated naturally by the steel-hulled boats of the Chinese, which are reinforced with their reinforced hulls designed for ramming other ships. And I think you saw some pictures earlier or videos earlier of those vessels. No? So they are actively engaging in this and trying again with the objective of intimidating the Philippines into giving up its rights and entitlements in the West Philippine Sea. Now, in addition to fishing activities, they've also deployed their marine scientific research vessels repeatedly into the South China Sea, engaging in resource exploration, with the obvious intention of, in the future, probably tapping these resources. So we have a problem here where the rights and entitlements of the Philippines are slowly and surely being whittled away by these operations. For this reason, the Philippines has even more strongly tried to cast a light on what is going on. And that is why the Transparency Initiative has been achieving its objectives in revealing to the world what is really going on, despite the statements coming out from the People's Republic of China. Next slide, please. Because that is the other side of this coin, the information warfare that is going on, trying to cast the Philippines as the troublemaker, the one that's always creating problems in the South China Sea, the one that's creating environmental damage, and so on and so forth. Especially in the past year, you see here just some snippets of various Chinese news outlets and various entities, no, on Twitter and social media. They've all been basically repeating the same line that all of these troubles and issues in the South China Sea are caused by the Philippines, acting as a puppet of the United States, no? Trying to stir up trouble, to cast a bad light upon China, and so on and so forth. Not considering, or rather totally ignoring the fact, no, that these troubles are all taking place 1,000 miles, 1,000 kilometers or more from the Chinese coastline, but only about 100 and sometimes only 60 nautical miles from the Philippines. Okay? And that the Philippines, in all of these instances, is only trying to exercise its rights and entitlements under UNCLOS, under international law, whereas China continues to assert its unilateral claim of ownership, sovereignty, sovereign rights, or other relevant rights, or whatever vague term it is that they use in all of these waters. Okay? And these information operations, I think, are in high gear, especially abroad. Okay? And that's why speaking at fora where there are international delegates is also very important for us. Next slide, please. For us, this is not about strategic military considerations primarily. For the Philippines, as you see there, it's about our rights and entitlements to natural resources in our exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. This is something that the Philippines, together with other developing countries, fought for, negotiated for during the negotiations for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea back in the 70s. If you recall, the United States, for example, and the maritime powers would have preferred that the rights and entitlements of states be limited as much as possible to the territorial sea, but it took the developing states to advocate for the expansion of these rights, resulting in the creation of the concept of the exclusive economic zone, a concept that was spearheaded actually by the African states, and quickly supported by many of the other developing states around the world. And the compromise reached between the maritime powers was to recognize these natural resource rights in exchange for guarantees of mobility across these waters. So for the Philippines, as a smaller, less powerful nation, and most importantly as an archipelagic and maritime nation, the seas bear great importance because we have an intuitive, we basically intuitively know that our future lies in our seas. We know that our archipelagic and inter-island waters are important. We also know that the resources in the waters around us are important. And here in the West Philippine Sea, considering that the fisheries here historically have contributed about 20% of our fisheries production, and anywhere from 30 to 40% of our coral reefs, the coral reefs that we claim are in the West Philippine Sea, then we know that this is vital for our food security. We also know that the untapped and unexplored petroleum resources of the Philippines are likely to be found in the West Philippine Sea, given the exploration that has been undertaken in this area since the 1970s. If there is any oil to be found in the Philippines, it is more likely to be found in the West Philippine Sea. And therefore, the West Philippine Sea is also vital to our energy security, and that is an important element for our economic security well into the future. And that's why this has become a very, very important issue for us. No? Now, This is taking place within a situation, as also already intimated, no, of strategic competition and geopolitical competition. And the problem here is that we are right in the middle of a vital spot in the world. Pakiclick yung isang slide. China, I believe, no, when it comes to the South China Sea, China's objectives and interests are really primarily military and strategic. So you see a mismatch between their interests and ours. No? And because of that military and strategic imperative, China seeks to protect its southern coast from what it perceives to be its potential adversaries, who can approach only from various vectors along the ocean. Paki-click lang. And two places right now are key for them to respond to this. Taiwan, which will be discussed in a later session, and the Philippines, as you see. Because between the Philippines and Taiwan, or the Philippines and Taiwan rather, straddle two important sea areas. Okay? Isang click na. Any potential adversary for China would approach from either of these two areas. And therefore, it is vital for China to be able to control these sea areas. No? And Taiwan and the Philippines particularly are key to this. No? Isang click. Okay, click mo na. Yan. If China is to respond well to any potential adversary approaching from these three vectors, isang click ulit. Taiwan, no? And one more. And the Philippines, no, are right between them. And therefore, either dominance, control, or influence is vital for any Chinese strategy, no, to defend itself from these potential adversaries. And that's why we are right now very highly contested. That is one reason why the pressure is very, very high on Taiwan, and next to Taiwan, it would be us. You can also see from this map why we seem to be standing alone and why it is relatively easy for China to try to isolate the Philippines. For ASEAN, you can immediately notice that the continental ASEAN states there on the left side, no, literally they have very different interests and priorities, as you can see just from the map. And other insular ASEAN states like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, etc., have the advantage and the benefit of distance and time. Before China can reach them, China has to go through the Philippines first. And so that is one reason why when it comes to ASEAN, Philippines, and the South China Sea and China, we seem to be standing alone. We seem to be an outlier. And for China, we seem to be the troublemaker. But for us, it's not about making trouble. It's about defending what is supposed to be ours. After all, during the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea negotiations, when we were talking about the exclusive economic zone, when we were advocating for it, China was on the side of the developing states, advocating as well for the recognition of such rights, because that was, during those times, an attempt of the developing states to try to prevent superior or more powerful states, those so-called distant water fishing states, no, from taking away their resources simply because they had the capacity and capability through technology and fleets. Well, guess what? Some decades later, China is now in their place. No? They're the ones with the fishing fleets, with the capacity and the technology, and now they've turned around and decided that the Southeast Asian states are not entitled to EEZs or continental shelves in the South China Sea. And so we need to clarify this, no? For all of us who might have an interest in this issue. I hope that these three slides give you a very vivid illustration of what is going on and why we need to help each other to try to protect the current system of international law in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, as well as the Greater Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Do we have any